Why, hello, Boobo.
Hello.
Are you here to
Hello.
join us for Fascism Friday?
Oh, that's my favorite. Yes, Fascism Friday.
It's everybody's favorite day, Fascism Friday. Uh, this is episode 244, Game Over Part 3. This is,
And, and the subtitle of this episode is "The Witches Are Here." Is that?
well, I mean, it's October 29th, and so I put on a witch hat. Oh, and I also have my...
There we go. Angry and ineffective.
Yep, so I'm...
Bubo is very ineffective, so Bubo can relate.
Boobo is effective at touching my heart.
That's
So
right.
there's that. Good morning, CK. Good morning. Oh, two suns.
Two
Actually,
sons.
are those two smiley faced Ritz crackers? I can't tell. Yeah. So this is Fascism Friday, episode 244,
Yes.
and I'm Ash Vance. Do you know I direct the Center for Prophetic Imagination?
I'm Daniel Walpert. I direct MICA, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing. And we're finishing up a series on, or inspired by, the Squid Games, an absolutely terrifying Netflix series.
It's all squid fun and squid games until somebody gets their squid eyes.
Yeah, until it's not. Until it's not. Yeah, and so to me, of course, the entire Squid Game setup itself, reeks of fascism. But I was really thinking about this morning as I was, hearing about the various garbage that Rupert Murdoch's media empire continues to allow to be spewed. Whether that's this latest total bullshit letter by Trump that he wrote into the Wall Street Journal, or whether it's, the Fox News crew. Um, and the world that's presented in the Squid Games, right, is this world where this very small number of people without any accountability can basically do whatever horrific thing they want, right? And the average person that gets caught in that, including even the people that manage to win, are just fodder for this endless kind of nightmare that these people want to enact in the world. And of course, in some ways, what's very bizarre is that they get to the point of wanting to do these things because they're basically because they're bored. That's the very interesting part of this. It's like at a certain point, you say, like, why? Like, why are they doing this? And and oftentimes people say, well, power. And it's like, okay, so you like having power over these things, but even that, whether it's power or money, at a certain point, what just takes over is boredom, which is a very interesting thing, and we've mentioned, of course, Hannah Arendt many times, and this banality of evil, that at a certain point, the worst thing in the world actually is boredom that comes from excess.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, yeah, and that's ties, if you're like, if the parameters of winning this game are ease and comfort and being able to affect your will in the world, and there's no limitations, there's no mutuality. It's just kind of this, I have this power to affect my will in the world, but my imagination is malformed. Then all you are is, you're just going to be a bored person who avoids suffering and who is going to be like, people act as though, people like these billionaires are just cold, calculated fuckers because they enjoy it. As though they're not, that they haven't become so conditioned by the whole system that they're upholding and recreating to be, I feel like they're fundamentally incapable of really registering the suffering of other people. Mm-hmm. So like when Jeff Bezos is like, I'm going to fly to space, instead of helping care for homeless people, it's not just because he's an individual selfish piece of shit, although that might be true. It's because the way the game is set up, like he's won the game. And so in order to win the game, you have to kind of get so conditioned to avoiding suffering that you can't even see the world accurately anymore. And so this is just, things are fucked up. And these bored billionaires who are like coming up with these initiatives, they think that it really is like the fever dream of a 13-year-old, like emotionally stunted boy.
Right. Yeah. And as you're pointing out there, this issue of that they are also conditioned by the system, right? Is that then at a certain point, right, they just start behaving in this fascistic way, almost without even knowing it, right? And this is why, we talked about this, I don't know if you remember if it was Monday or Wednesday, how the Squid Games is the modern version of some of these, period piece dramas that you see about like what happened at the court in Versailles, or some of the ways that, for example, the Chinese emperors are portrayed, where they're just sitting in some room, playing with a cricket and having some weird philosophical conversation while their army is, crushing another country somewhere. And
as peacocks stroll the garden.
Yeah.
We have them brought in special from Eurasia. Yeah.
Right. In that accent while speaking Mandarin. But yeah, so there's this bizarre thing that these kind of systems of accumulation do to the people who are at the top as well. And everybody becomes formed in, foolishness, right? I mean, that's the wisdom tradition out of the biblical scriptures, talk about foolishness, and that even the wise people, the powerful people are also fools, right? The fool isn't just the, drunk person lying in the gutter, right? The emperor is also a fool. And I think in some ways, that's almost a more terrifying vision, I think, than the brilliant, malevolent overlord.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. There's this meme that that CPI shares. I'm going to paraphrase it. It's from Simone Weil talking about the way oppression works, is that those who are doing the crushing don't feel it, and people always push back against that, as though out of a mix of empathy towards the oppressor, like they feel it, they're malformed by it too, they're people too. Like I get that, and that this idea that somehow one of the biggest, most pervasive myths in our society that we cling to because it gives us hope is that oppression is intentional. And the reason we love that is like, if we could just Ebenezer Scrooge someone like Jeff Bezos, where he's like, oh my God, right. I've been not using
I've seen
money.
The light.
Yeah, now I can use my billions of dollars for liberation. It's like, that's not going to happen. I'm sorry. The reason I know it's not going to happen is because it's never fucking happened. Right? And we get deluded into thinking that. And the thing is, it's not, to get to that point, you almost have to have, to use the old Jungian kind of term, a lacuna. You have to have this gap in your consciousness. Like you're just unable to perceive the implications of your actions. You get formed into that point. And it's even if you're, like this is the same kind of scenario that we think about whenever, like, oh, what if Bernie Sanders were to be president? Now, even if you had a morally well-formed person, I'm just, for sake of argument, let's say that Bernie Sanders is, step into this role, there's something about these performances that we have to give within the system that slowly cuts off our own capacity to really deeply feel. So this is this chicken and egg problem that we talk about all the time. Are these billionaires causing problems because they're shitty people, or are they shitty people because they've been put in this position? Like, at a certain point, it's just speculation. Mm-hmm. And so when we're thinking about like Squid Games and the way we commoditize ourselves and compete, like, we're all being conditioned to live in the system, to not be aware of the harm we're causing ourselves and others. It's kind of shitty. I lost my train of thought in there, but it's bad. Fascism is bad.
Fascism is bad.
We don't like it.
Yeah. Well, and so, one of the things then that this brings up for people, and we've been starting off this spiritual direction and social transformation program this fall, and in the systems class that you've been doing, and I've been doing this contemplative psych class. There's some of the reaction that people have to some of this is like, well, oh my gosh, so now I'm like terminally depressed and we're all just completely fucked. Like, there's nothing you can do. And people will often kind of fight against that and go, well, there's got to be a way out, right? And one of my favorite little spiritual practice phrases that comes out of the Buddhist tradition is give up all hope of fruition.
That's a good bumper sticker.
Yeah, that's a good bumper. That's our next T-shirt.
Yeah.
Right. And part of what that gets at, right, is that the sort of hope of the ego self that, oh, I can fix this, right? Or yeah, if we just send Jeff Bezos the right meme, or somebody manages to get into the Oval Office and enlighten the president somehow or something,
or
if we can just
Grace Slick wanted like to dump acid into Richard Nixon's drink.
Right. Yeah, if we could just dose everybody. That's actually really in right now, right? Psychedelics. Everybody's going to take psychedelics. And,
if only we could get Joe Biden to microdose daily. Right. He would have a of consciousness.
That suddenly, that everything would be better, right? And then, of course, people are kind of endlessly disappointed, right? And so the spiritual life is actually very realistic about the kind of hopelessness of that sort of approach. And so then the paradox is, well, if you give up all hope of that kind of struggle, which, particularly in American culture, drives us totally nuts, that you begin to enter into a different sort of space altogether. Where there's maybe room for completely different creative kind of thinking, where there's a completely different sort of relationship to ourselves and to reality, but that we actually have to travel through that space of feeling the sort of despair of all of this, which is not a fun place to be.
Some comments coming in. Veronica writes, you forgot to include CNN, MSNBC, two heads of the same snake. I'm trying to remember when you brought it up. Did you make a comment about Fox News?
About Fox, yes.
Yeah, I mean, they're all like, if by two heads of the same snake, you mean they're all neoliberal, like capitalists, propaganda machines, then yes. If you're doing the both sidesism of that, really, I mean, I don't know, it's complicated, but yes, they all kind of push us towards the same like sad reality. but in different ways. Kathleen writes, "Good morning."
Good morning, Kathleen.
Uh,
Kathleen looking good in all of her cruise shots.
Yeah, cruise pictures. CK writes, "I think cruelty becomes fun for people." There's kind of a weird way, which that's true. It's like, I don't know. It's part of me doesn't this idea that there are these underground homelessness fight clubs where billionaires watch like homeless people beat each other to death for sport, like seems like a ridiculous, when you start thinking about this sort of like enjoying of cruelty, like it seems like, well, that's cartoonish, but there's still a ton of truth to this. Like I wonder what it's like if I could be a fly on the wall of anybody. At a certain point, it's irrelevant. Like if someone's having fun because the stock market is gaming in their favor and they know that other people are suffering and homeless rates are up, but they still enjoy it. To me, it's functionally not very different than just the pure delight of cruelty. It still fits my definition of evil, which is people benefiting and enjoying the suffering of others.
Yeah. Well, and I think that may happen for some people, or that may be sort of a phase. But I think the point is that even that gets boring after a while. I mean, that's the really kind of fascinating thing to me about this is that, right, if you really can always do anything you want and anything you can imagine, like after a while, there's nothing that is fun. Yeah, and that's a very then bizarre state, I think, to exist in.
CK writes, "Psychedelics changed my life."
Yeah, psychedelics are great.
Yeah, we're not going to dump on psychedelics.
No.
And I don't know. I'm not sure. Tyler writes, "Just wait until you get your first taste of adrenochrome." I don't know what that is.
What is adrenochrome?
Like, this is the thing. Like, just
that's the latest, newest thing.
I don't want to diminish the importance of your own like consciousness raising and expansiveness and non-dual mind, like these sorts of things. But I feel like we overemphasize these things in weird magic ways sometimes. Like I keep seeing, like I've been noticing again, some memes about dual versus non-dual mind. And I understand what that means, but there's a reason why white Western people love this idea of having an evolved consciousness. And then want to shit on people who they think are dualistic in their thinking, which happens to be most of the developed world, according to them. And so, like, this idea of, psychedelics are great and they can be a part of just like spiritual practice. They can have powerful contemplative practice. But let's not kid ourselves that somehow Jeff Bezos will reach this level of enlightenment to be like, I am an avatar of pure love and I'm going to use my billions for good. There's a reason that the best that our fiction writers can imagine is a billionaire becoming like a nighttime vigilante. Anyways. Michelle writes, "Not sure microdosing is going to help the zombie perv prez."
Yeah.
It depends on what you microdose, maybe.
Right.
I just realized, can you think, I mean, this has blew my mind. Is not the Eucharist just microdosing Jesus? What? Kathleen writes, "I was recently in Spain. People there told me that they are worried about the rise of racism. However, they have a long history to look back upon, so they seem to be making the best of whatever happens."
Well, yeah, I mean, racism and xenophobia is rising all across Europe, and And as the effects of climate change increase, this is only going to get worse. We've talked about this, the issue of migration. I mean, this is just going to be more and more of a phenomenon, and yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, and then to this idea of climate change exacerbating the different kinds of refugee crises, destabilizing different economies. We have the pandemic. There's going to be the obvious result of kind of rise of fascism and nationalism as a way of shore up defending. And then, but this is where kind of part of the whole reason that this works for the rich people to weaponize is because the competitive analogy is so powerful in our society that we think that the only reason that we can't have good things is because these poor immigrants who don't require as much money can come in and outcompete us. Like, we fall into this way of thinking where everything is gamified and we're set up to be the losers and we have to change the rules in a fascist direction in order for us to stay on top.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's so messed up. Jennifer writes, have you read Margaret Wheatley's newest book, Who Do We Choose to Be? She outlines societal collapses over history. I haven't heard of that, so that sounds fascinating and worth checking out. Tyler writes, search Q. I don't want to. Search QAnon and adrenochrome for some interesting conspiracy nonsense.
Okay. All right.
Oh great. Michelle's ha-haing about the microdosing of Jesus. I mean, I know that was a very Protestant statement of mine.
Yeah.
But I still think it's interesting to think about. Catherine writes, to tie it into Halloween TV, bored billionaires' enjoyment of life fading because they have nothing left to strive for sounds a lot like vampire depression. Maybe they need to take a super slumber. That's a reference to What We Do in the Shadows. There's a
yes. Great show.
Where Nandor joins like a fitness club in order to get past his vampire depression.
Yeah. Well, and Catherine, I'm so excited that you went to the Rocky Horror Picture Show finally. It's awesome.
The ghost emoji at the end is also very nice.
Yes, the vampires flatting. They need to be flatting vampires.
Veronica writes, humans seem to have a propensity for cruelty. I don't think it's limited to a certain type of person. There's a period of time with teenage boys in particular when they will easily do experimental cruel things to animals without making the suffering. Many of these boys go on to enjoy a certain kind of pornography as adults, which, by the way, has become increasingly popular in our culture. Does that propensity for cruelty go underground for many boys? The propensity for cruelty from comments cut off at a certain length.
There's no question that humans have a propensity for cruelty. And that's been described in many different ways over the centuries. Obviously, some religious and spiritual traditions talk about it from a kind of an evil spirit point of view. Freud talked about the sadism impulse. Discussion about hatred and all kinds of different negative sins. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. That movement towards power over is very much a part of being human, and it seems to it like gives people this feeling of power, right? Which then feels good, like I can kick your ass, right? I mean, what look, why is we've got so many of these, books and movies and everything where, the protagonist is somebody that can be cruel to whoever, and I mean that's a big part of our seriously messed up condition for sure.
Well, and it gets super complicated. Like, thinking about the way that relates with individual formation and societies. Like, I mean, you take your average person who's never watched a film and show them John Wick, and they'd probably cry because I'm more used to that now. So there's a lot of this is socialization and how,
Right.
well, and then our inability, like, so I mean, if we go with the classic Jungian thing, so we've got shit in our shadows that we don't like to deal with, so we project it onto someone, and then when we're cruel to them, it's because in some way we're exercising the shadow, like the scapegoating, all that kind of stuff. Our society doesn't. You could have healthier societies where they wisely help us deal with these impulses for the common good, and where we nurture care and love, and gift economies and Shangri-La, yay, everything happy. We can move in that direction, but clearly our society doubles down on this shit.
Well, in most societies, I mean, most societies have, most societies do, and
well, yeah, and to the extent that the benefit, like, there's the more imperial and hierarchical your society is, the more you want to normalize this shit, and so we have and there's a reason why hierarchical dominating forms of society tend to do better.
It's the Borg phenomenon. And, one of the things about the Squid Games show that they don't actually examine really at all, it's almost kind of a passing thing. There's like one moment where they say something about it, is, this game is only made possible by all of these workers, right, that are working the game and doing all of these horrible, horrible things. And, the whole question of like, well, so where do you get this army of psychotic fascists? Well, that's something that people also get socialized into. And I know that I've mentioned before this great book called Ordinary Men, I think, which is, this examination of how did this particular battalion in the German army become part of the Nazi extermination program. And, that through, right, so the other part of the cruelty thing is that you realize that, at some point you're given this choice. Like, so either that people can be cruel to you, right? Or you can become part of the oppressor and be cruel to others. And so all of the fear and the kind of terror and horror and humiliation and sense of powerlessness kicks in. And you're going to get a pretty good percentage of people who just, buy into it, say, well, I have to go along. I've got a family, I've got kids, they're threatening to kill everybody that I love, et cetera, et cetera. And, that's what happens over and over and over again.
Well, when you think about it, like all the way down in our system, like you have hazing, like our society functions in the hazing model. I have to go through, I had to pay for student loans, so why should someone else's student loans be forgiven? I was hazed, you should be hazed too. There's that kind of mentality. There's this idea that the meritocracy baked in there. If it's bad for you, it's because you didn't know how to play the game right and you had it coming. All sorts of these swirling lies and bullshit floating around that make us just try from all these different angles to make us feel okay with the fact that that person is sleeping in a tent by the sidewalk, and that's normal.
Yeah.
And so then we act as like, I mean, I don't want to be too nihilistic, but then we act as though somehow, like, if only our mayor would meditate more, it would be different. I'm like, that's just. And then if I say things like this is funny. Like I'm going to get a message saying like defending contemplative spirituality, as though I'm not a fucking contemplative practitioner. That my problem is that I don't believe in it enough. It's
all right. More comments.
Okay, where are we in these comments? Patricia, much like spirituality in the arts, one of the best ways of moving through a block of creativity is actually to limit the palette. Okay, limit the options to open a deeper connection. Austerity, asceticism doesn't have to be self-punishing. Yes, I mean this is the counterintuitive thing.
Right. Give up all hope of fruition.
We tend to think that somehow having more options will give us more freedom and gives us more creativity, when really this another strategy of our society is the ever expanding illusion of choice. So that we think we actually have meaningful choices when we're really given we're bombarded with false choices. Sherrod writes libido dominandi. I don't know what that is, except for the name of an awesome punk band.
Well, it's something about libido and dominance. So I can imagine. I can imagine what that is. But if you want to say more about that, that'd be great.
I'm going to look it up. Right. The will to power.
Yes, the will to power.
There we go. Thank you for. Yes. I mean, I'm going to memorize that now. Libido dominandi.
Yeah.
It's a spiritual deficit. We haven't evolved past it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I would certainly, right. It's a deficit on a number of levels, and I think you're absolutely right. We have not evolved past it, and I think that, and what all the spiritual traditions point to is that in order to evolve past it, we really have to reckon with death in a very different way. And I think that's to me, as I've thought about these things a lot over a lot of years, that's what I keep coming back to, is that, you know, and I think those of us that are involved in the Jesus tradition, you know, we talk about resurrection, but I don't think anybody really believes that. And so, you know, if we had a lot of resurrected folks wandering around, it would be a lot easier to evolve past that, because then we would opt, you know, if faced with some insanely cruel options, more and more people would opt to not do that, because they'd be like, well, I'm just going to come back in this different eternal form. And I'm cool with that. But without that, most people just get to this point of, well, if it's dying or becoming a Nazi stormtrooper, I guess I'll become a Nazi stormtrooper, because that's better than dying right now. But it's true. It's an evolutionary conundrum.
Lots of comments here. Past time, as is our MO. Shell writes, on racism, there is a group called Integrated Schools I'm loving to follow, trying to affect change in a very deliberate way.
Cool.
Neil writes, regarding the enjoyment of cruelty, I feel like a lot of memes that get passed around are tapping into this enjoyment. The zingers that, even if I agree with them, are designed to wound, score points, and shut down conversation. To tie it all together, maybe they're microdoses of cruelty. I mean, there's a lot in there. Like, I want to dive into the philosophy of that. Like, because to me, wanting someone to shut up and shut down conversation isn't necessarily, like, part of me wants to come up with like a 4-dimensional like chart of the difference between harsh truth and cruelty, and when someone is being kind of terse versus being mean, and when it's not kind. Like, because part of the thing, the reason why I'm triggered by that comment a little bit is this sort of equating with kindness and niceness that we do in our society, and it bogs down conversation.
Yeah, but I do think, Neil, that you're onto something. I think the whole thing of a zinger, like, gotcha.
Yeah,
there's a desire to win, and that feels good, you know. And yeah, I think that's part of it.
Yeah, and it's this sort of like this desire for revenge. Which is like, you know, I want Jeff Bezos to not have money and be a regular person. But there are people out there that would probably enjoy watching him suffering and crying, and that kind of a thing. Exactly. Yeah. I don't know. Let's just assume that applies to everything we've said. CK writes, what if the great test is to live in this cruel life, and the gifts You can learn to love. Can you
Well,
learn to love? Yeah,
I don't know
that's the
about a
big test.
test, but I think that is the
Kind of the
that
goal.
is the task of the spiritual life for sure.
Sharad says you can't be too nihilistic, man.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the line between hope and nihilism is very, very thin because um, to me, there's a reckless foolishness to being to loving in this world. That
Mhm.
has to be not. Then it's again, it ties with Dan's great favorite quote that we're going to put on a T-shirt: "Give up all hope of fruition." I don't want to love and be compassionate and seek enlightenment because I think necessarily that it'll be effective. Like I do care about effectiveness, but it has to be enough for me to do that without gain. Otherwise, my self deception is such that I will use it to benefit myself, and then it's self defeating. Like so, there's this sort of like kind of jujitsu that we have to do with our mind, where we're loving for the sake of loving without reward, and that's to me is kind of one step away from nihilism, if we're honest. Susan writes, "I never understood that vindictiveness. Why I want anyone to suffer, especially if you have." Yeah, I agree.
No.
Sherrod writes, "Contemplative practices don't change the world. They help you cope with the world you can't unfuck."
Yeah. That certainly is one aspect of them for sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep rolling. We're over time.
It's
Beautiful
beautiful costume.
costume.
It's really just a hat.
Yes, it is. It's just a hat, but
Hats are
see,
powerful.
hats are, yeah.
Julie writes, "Contemplative spirituality has been oversold and so completely monetized in the US that hearing the term always tweaks my most cynical self." That's how I
Yeah.
feel.
It's certainly, and that's what is happening with the psychedelic work, and I mean, our culture is brilliant at commoditizing and making a fad out of anything. You got to give it that. It's very good at that.
I mean, you have Squid Games, which has problems, but like is, an anti-capitalist thing being produced, kind of like distributed by Netflix.
Right, exactly.
And like, people are like, yeah, this is a critique of capitalism, but then they're all enjoying, like, I hope that fucker dies. Like, it's amazing. Uh,
Yeah.
Ellen writes, "If you really believe in resurrection, you'll be labeled mentally ill pretty quickly."
Yep. There is a lot of truth to that. Angry and ineffective.
Sherrod writes, "Libido dominandi equals the Augustinian analysis of sin that roots it not just in the desire to do bad things, but to be in control. The idea is that the attempt to shape our environment, even in good ways, inevitably results in oppression." I mean, there's a lot to that, and I mean,
Yeah.
we could cross-reference Taoism and the ways and the way we use spirituality as a technology to exercise our will in the world. And this is the great irony of the contemplative spirituality stuff is when white people use it as a technique for gaining greater self-control and dominance over how they perceive reality, so that they can shape it. That's part of what's happening.
from escaping. Yeah. Yeah. All
Some sort
right, and the last great comment.
CK nailed it.
CK nailed it. I think that's true.
And that could be another T-shirt.
There we go.
And
nobody would know what it meant.
CK would know. You see thousands of people wearing it.
Would know. Yes. All right. So next week we are actually not going to be here at all. We've got other stuff going on, and so we will be back a week from Monday. But then that will be our last week for the calendar year, for a number of reasons that we can explain to you when we get back. So come join us for the last hurrah of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And otherwise, have a good day.
See you.
Great to be with you all.
See you after next week.
Bye.
Happy Halloween. Fight this fascism.
Fight the fascism.